So tool of choice is going to be a razor knife. And so this side is definitely going to be rough. What's going on, guys? My name's Callie. I'm the Okayest engineer, and I want to be one of the first to wish you a happy 4th of July. I thought, what a better weekend than to hang my first flag in my first shop than this one right here. And for America's 249th birthday, Fiberglass is giving a 24.9% discount site-wide. So please head over there and snag that awesome discount before the weekend ends. Now on to the video. First of all, thanks everyone for guessing how much this cowling was going to end up weighing. I had guesses down from like the 8 pounds up to the 50 or 60 pounds. Happy to report that this thing started at about 16 and a half. I've done some trimming. We're down to about 15.75. Jared Itwiller was basically right on the money, but there is still weight to get cut out. You can tell behind me the cowling is officially in 3 pieces. It didn't go quite as planned, so hang out and see how we get through this. So I want to get the cowling test fit to the helicopter before I go and unfortunately rip off all of that plug. But before I can do that, I need to get the hole cut out in the top of the cowling where this, I don't know, sail comes through. So I'm gonna make a template off of the plug. We'll get that transferred over to the cowling with some blue tape, and then I'll just trim that section out and we will do a test fit on the helicopter. Put this in. I'm just gonna feed it through the hole, maybe. Pull. I don't think, ooh. Oh, let's go. That's not all the way where it needs to be, but it's close. So this isn't in the exact spot. It's actually a little bit to the rear end of the helicopter. That's because you can imagine the carbon cowling literally is an exact replica of the plug, which is the helicopter. So this surface on the cowling technically should be this surface on the plug, and so the thickness of my carbon is the delta there, and that's why it can't slide on all the way. So we have about an inch, and it's going to be that way until I go and I pull the entire plug off of the helicopter, and it's hurting the inside a lot to rip off the plug just for how much effort went into actually making it. But that's next. I will rip off the plug. That will free up all of the space where the cowling is supposed to go. And then we'll give this thing an actual test fit. All right, here goes nothing. So much for all the hard work. So tool of choice is going to be a razor knife. I know the front half of all this should come off fairly easy. I have a barrier of blue tape and then masking tape, and so I'm pretty confident that's going to come off. The back, not so much. I did hot glue all the Pink Panther foam in pretty sturdily to the fuselage, so I know that there's a bond here. Not to mention, it was a really tight fit. I hope I can get it back off. Oh, it's pretty snug when I put it on there in the first place, and so this side is definitely going to be rough. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's no better way than to just jump in, right? So maybe I'll start with the front, see how far I can get, and then this stuff is going to be brutal in the back. I don't know how I'm going to get it off. All right, here we go. she goes. Well, it wasn't pretty, but it all came off, and now the basement is a hot mess, except for the one last piece, which is the flange portion that's still on the boom. This is 2 layers of fiberglass, so it's stronger than the rest of it. I did that because it needs to represent the thickness of the flange of the actual cowling so that the actual flange will fit over the boom. I can't pry on the boom because the boom is pretty thin and pretty delicate, and so I don't want to do anything to jeopardize the strength and condition of the boom. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an angle grinder with a sanding pad, and I'm going to sand slowly across the top of this seam until it reveals the blue tape, which means I've almost gone too far. That should get this to the point where I can separate this in half like in a clamshell and then peel it off the rest of the boom. That's the plan anyways. Not sure if it's going to work, but that's where we're going to start. I feel like I'm leaving part of my soul on the street for trash pickup. So after some of the excitement wore off, I did pull the cowling back off the helicopter and we weighed it. It came in at about 16.5 pounds, completely untrimmed, so we still are going to lose a little bit of weight there. I also checked the CG, and it lands about right here, which just so happens to be about 13 inches from the main shaft. So what does that mean for center of gravity, weight, and balance? I'll either have to add just over 4 pounds to the nose of the helicopter, or I need to move my body's mass forward by 1.25 inches. So obviously the latter is the better idea, and that is a lot of the reason that I'm making my own carbon fiber seat. It'll be lighter than the factory seat, and it'll also put me in a slightly reclined position, shifting my CG forward, and I'm hoping will totally counteract any negative effect that I had on the CG from the cowling. So the next thing I want to do is get a rough trim, and I say rough, but it's probably going to end up being the final trim in almost all the locations. But that is to lock down kind of the seam line that will be the transition between the cowling and the fuselage. Now I need to be careful because there is a transition from up here to down here where a cavity starts to develop underneath here. If you remember, I totally changed the shape of this chin area and completely modded that body line. And so I need to be really careful. I can't just come in here haphazardly and cut down here and kind of like go across, because I'll end up with a place where my cowling separates from the actual fuselage. It's touching kind of in this location here, but there would be a void out here, and somewhere between here and here I can transition further back into the helicopter and then go vertical. So I think what I'm going to do for now is just leave it really long. I don't think there's any harm in doing so, and worst case scenario, I have like 3 or so inches of overlap where it's basically sitting perfectly flush against the original fuselage. But to be fair, the fit, I'm just in awe, honestly, of how close the fit is. I mean, technically this should be an exact replica of the plug, and the plug fit obviously perfect, so so should the cowling, but it still just blows my mind at how good the fit has actually been. There's one exception to that. Down here, I cut, I think, or I didn't lay up enough carbon, and I was able to fix it, but there is a very, very small gap that sits right here, and this chin area that I'm going to call it is actually about 2 inches further back than the other side, hence why it didn't quite make it to the landing on the fuselage. But it's close enough. I was able to pull it in tight, and we'll glue it in that way, but that is the only place on the entire cowling that I just missed the mark. So I'm going to lay in some blue tape around the entire perimeter and mark my cutting line from the outside, and then we'll take the chigga chigga, as Mike Patey once again calls it, and go ahead and trim our rough cuts for the cowling. I have it all masked off where I think I want to cut it. I'm not going to cut here. This is the actual line for the lap joint, so we'll get into that a little later. But everything else I'm going to trim to rough size. I'm also going to get my first taste of Kevlar. I wanted to chop a whole bunch of this off just to make it clean, but the lap joint that extends down this seam also extends into this junk. So I'm super curious how that's going to turn out. I have a feeling this is going to be a disaster. I'm also going to be really careful around this seam. I don't want to break into that lap joint yet. I just want to get this thing rough cut and get rid of all the sharp edges. So this wasn't supposed to happen. There were two spots where I attempted to cut through the Kevlar, and it cut through like butter, and it didn't fray, it didn't fuzz, it didn't do anything. And I needed it to. I am counting on the fact that the Kevlar is hard to cut through, and it'll tell me how deep I need to cut. I even took this piece, which is out of the back of the helicopter, the exit back there, and I cut in through the backside just to see what would happen, and it too just cut right through the Kevlar. So I'm not sure if this is because I'm using an oscillating saw and that just does a better job, and if a Dremel tool will be worse. This is also a weird scenario. I have to figure out what's the worst tool to cut through Kevlar, not the best, because it needs to cut through the carbon, but I need to know when I hit the Kevlar. So we're going to have to figure out some more stuff before I go cutting up the whole cowling. This could be bad. We'll see. I threw the cowling back on for a test fit after the trim, and I am just blown away at how good the fit is between the carbon piece and the cowling. I mean, you couldn't even fit a sheet of paper through that fit up. It is so good. And also, there was a bit of controversy over when I was making the plug. I mentioned that I needed to stack up additional material before the surface of the plug that would represent the thickness of my carbon part. And so let's talk about that for a second. So the outside surface of my carbon part is the surface of my mold, which was pulled directly from the surface of my plug. And so I needed the surface of my plug to represent the surface of this carbon part with the additional stack up of the thickness of the material. Had I made my plug where the surface was actually on the fuselage of the helicopter, that means my surface of my carbon part would be on the surface of the fuselage, and it wouldn't actually stack up right by the thickness of my carbon. And that stack up is even more important back here, where this part completely wraps around the entire tail boom with no seam. Had I not added additional thickness to my plug, and if you remember, I actually added 2 layers of fiberglass in this location because I was extra worried about it. If I didn't do that, this cowling wouldn't have slid all the way down this cone, and it would be stuck probably somewhere back here. And getting it to get further on would have required me sanding out material from the inside of the cowling, which would have been a disaster, probably catastrophic. So once again, if you are making a part that has to mate up to some other part that isn't in your plug, you have to account for the thickness of your final carbon part material, or bad things will happen. Well, the reason you guys haven't gotten a video in so long is seriously because I have drawn and redrawn and laid out and retaped this 100 times over the last few nights, and to be honest, I have done everything possible to delay cutting into this, because to say I'm scared doesn't even come close. I do not want to screw this up. Part of this, though, was the fact that I didn't actually know how I was going to end this cut on the upper half of the cowling. I knew I was going to cut along this seam here, but I didn't know how I was going to terminate it. And I stumbled across, fortunately, an actual pretty good idea, I think. So I'm going to cut this across the top, and I'm actually going to use a 1/4 turn fastener to go directly from the cowling directly into the fuselage with a 1/4 turn right here. And I'm also going to do the same down here. I'm going to lock it into the fuselage here. Everywhere else we'll have 1/4 turn fasteners that connect the cowling to this flange piece. And you're probably going, well, Callie, why the heck aren't you just fastening it to the fuselage everywhere? Wouldn't that make more sense? And the short answer is yes, it makes more sense, but I'm actually not able to do so. And it'll make more sense if you take a peek in here. So you can see down, I've created this void in this area. And so I don't actually have fuselage to mount to across this entire line. It gets to be a void, and so I have no choice but to connect the fuselage to a new body piece, and that's why this line is here. So really the only thing left to do here is to start cutting. But before I do, I'm actually going to come in and drill 1/8" holes for where every single one of those 1/4 turn fasteners is supposed to go. That's so later I can cleco it all back together and hold it in the correct position so that I can eventually bond on the front half of the cowling. And so you do it now before it's cut in half, obviously, so it maintains that perfect fitment. Then I got a brand new blade on my Chigga Chigga. I've got my lucky t-shirt on, Formula Buckeyes. There's literally nothing else I can do to hopefully make this go well. I started on the right side of the helicopter because I pretty much figured I'd be making some mistakes, which I did. I don't think they're very big and they'll get covered up, but I did it on the right side of the helicopter because this is the least favorable side. I'll fill fuel on that side. I will start inspecting on that side. That'll probably, the left side of the helicopter will be the pretty side. So I figured if I was going to screw something up, I'd do it on this side. I got this cut as far as I possibly can with it still on the helicopter. I won't be able to make this cut up here or the final cut down there until I pull the cowling off. Also, positive note, the Kevlar did work as intended, actually better. It didn't fuzz up the way I expected it to, but you can definitely feel as you're cutting into it when you reach that Kevlar, and the yellow color is very easy to see also to know when you've gone deep enough. So although it didn't fuzz the way I expected, this is probably actually better than that because I'll be able to clean it up really well and you won't see those fuzzes left behind. The cowling is in 3 pieces, and this crazy flange idea worked about as okayest as I thought it was going to. This flange is extra wide, so this will get cut down, and as it just turned out, having this extra width actually helped a lot when trying to get this thing apart. This edge over here I think is actually 1 or maybe 2 plies of the 6K, and so it's relatively flimsy, and it really helped me get the tool under the other side where that peel ply was to get that separation started. That coupled with coming in from the outside with a wedge, this helped to separate the actual 2 parts from the outside, and so the combination of coming from in and out and zippering down kind of with the wedge, that's eventually what got these 2 pieces apart. There is a little bit of Kevlar sticking out in the seam, so I'm going to have to try and figure out how to get rid of most of that, mainly just so from the outside you don't see it and it won't inhibit the 2 pieces from going together. Outside of that, it's actually pretty clean. I'll trim this flange up to make it just long enough for what's required for those 1/4 turn fasteners, and it should be good to go. So now that we have the good out of the way, let's talk about the bad and the things that I would change. So unfortunately, and I don't know how I didn't catch this. It's one of those like staring at it didn't give you the solution, or at least tell you what you were doing wrong. It's not symmetrical. And once again, I should have figured this out, but I based the cutting line on each side of the cowling separate from each other. I just casted a laser on the side of the helicopter, guessed where it should be, and that's kind of where I decided where the line would go. Hindsight, I should have at least checked how they were side to side to see if they were symmetric. And in this case, they're about, I don't know, 1.5 or 2 inches off at the bottom. They're actually pretty close up here at the top. At the end of the day, it's actually not going to do anything at all. You're never going to see both sides at the same time, so the eye will never know that they're different. And other than whoever ends up watching these videos probably won't ever know either. That's all okay, except it's going to bug me, for one. Two, when you take the cowling off, I'll have a larger flange on one side than the other, so I guess that's one way you would know. But even more than that is I planned on post-curing just this portion of the cowling, and I need to build a fixture, like a heat treat fixture, to secure the bottom hoop. And I was really hoping that it was going to be on the same plane, so that I wouldn't be having a mismatch and it could be built out of, like, I don't know, a couple of sheets of MDF or something. So that's just going to make things more complicated on the heat treat side of things. So yeah, if I were to do this again, I would have measured a little bit better, would have made sure it was symmetric left to right. It would have made my symmetry part of me a lot happier, and it would have made me today have less effort to go into making something for a heat treat fixture. So I'm going to get this thing Clecoed back together because I'm mainly curious to see what the final fit is going to look like, as if the 1/4 inch fasteners would be in there. I want to get it back on the helicopter so I can kind of see how this flange is going to look as well when the cowling is off, and just get another overall feel for the entire assembly. All right, I've got it taped back to the helicopter. It should give you an idea of how it's going to separate. You can see where each one of those clecos are will be a 1/4 turn fastener, plus an additional one at the top and one at the bottom that aren't drilled yet. This seam is actually, if you can ignore the yellow Kevlar, the seam is actually really sweet. And if you remember from the last time, I put that separation in the two 3K pieces of carbon. So that seam line told me where to cut it. I cut it exactly on that seam line, and you basically can't even tell that there was ever a seam there in the first place, which was the plan. So as long as I can clean up that Kevlar, I mean, this thing's going to be real good. And then finally, this is what it will look like when the cowling is removed from the helicopter. Obviously it looks worse because I have all the extra material on the flange, but that'll get trimmed. It'll actually come in pretty close to the real bulkhead of the fuselage, and it'll just have enough of a skirt to hold the cowling to it. So I think it's going to be pretty good. I still got a whole lot of work ahead of me. I need to get a fixture made so I can heat treat the cowling. I don't think I'm going to actually cut it apart any further, probably until I have more of the helicopter assembled. I'm going to eventually put in some access panels into the side. That, once again, I can't really do until I know where the access panels need to be. And so this cowling is, for now, going to come to an end until I have more of the helicopter to actually do more. So that's going to do it for this video. Stoked that this crazy idea that I had actually worked. I definitely wouldn't do it in a production environment, but for a prototype and where you need a flange, I mean, this is perfect. It worked awesome. Tedious. It took a long time, but it sure as heck beats the alternative of designing that flange in a mold and making more parts and doing all that. So stoked. that's going to do it for this one. As always, go build something cool. Never stop learning. And we'll see you on the next one.